and then you can decide what you want to take from the rest. The first thing is that I want to acknowledge that there are people who have suffered significant losses. Some of those we know about. For others of us, we may not know. And so as I speak this morning, I want to speak with as much tender loving care as I can to those who have gone through losses in their own lives. The second thing I would say, I want to really preface this, is it is so wonderful for me and Melissa to finally be somewhere as parishioners. and where we have enjoyed your company so much. We were at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Burke, Virginia for 20 years, which is a very large, multi-staff, suburban parish. Hatch'em, match'em, dispatch'em. And so when I retired, we had a difficult time, A, finding places that didn't know us in Northern Virginia, and two, difficult to say this, but finding places that were really welcoming. Really welcoming. And when I was a college student at Wake Forest, I did an interim study, an internship on the Hill, and I was at this little college that used to be right up the road here, Mount Vernon Junior College. And I came to St. Patrick's when Kid Cheryl was here. That's a long, long time ago. So I said to Melissa, let's cross the Rubicon. Let us go over to the wilderness where nobody knows us. So we walked in the door here, and immediately, who did we bump into? But your seminarians who were there at that time, Tony and Amy Anderson. Yeah. And Amy was the teacher of our grandchild. Tony was a very good friend of our son Will. They were in seminary, so we were immediately known. I headed to the restroom. Melissa sat down in the pew, and by the time I got back, she said, "You know what? Somebody's already spoken to me. Somebody has already said good morning," which was a really happy change from when we even went to my field ed parish in Virginia, and we weren't spoken to. And when we stood in line, and we're professional church shoppers, when I stood in line to talk with the rector, and the rector just never quite got around to us, and so when I said goodbye, we said goodbye. It matters that you wear your name tags and that you speak to people. The other way to put it is, don't feed strays because you might get stuck with them, as you have with us. So we went through the line, and I introduced myself to Kurt. I said, I want to thank your parish secretary. She was so welcoming on the phone. And he said, well, she's standing right here. You can thank her. And I said, Karen, it was a godsend to hear a human voice. Would you believe there are some churches I called, one in particular that said, please read our website and then call us back if you have any questions. All of this lengthy introduction is to get across one point. There is absolutely nothing that takes the place of human contact. There's nothing that human beings thirst for, are hungry for more, than to really connect with other people. And in all that we try to do, to reach out to those who want, in all that we try to do, to stumble through our words, please pray God, go ahead, God make our blunders wise, go and be there as a human being for others. That's what's needed. Went through the line. I had promised Melissa, of course, that we didn't know anybody here, and we immediately found that not to be true. And click. Click. Immediately, not only did I meet Karen, but I also met Lauren Lash, seminarian, who immediately said, "Oh, you're Larry Packard. You were the rector for Adam Gorin." And I said, "And I met you back then?" They were classmates. And we both remember when the telephone rang at 6 o'clock in the morning and Melissa said, "Larry, it's Martha Horn, the dean over at Virginia Seminary. It's Martha Horn." This can't be good. Martha? They had found Adam deceased early in the morning. A seminarian who was 26 years young. He had died of a congenital heart defect that his father had died of at age 35. So you get up and you fix the strongest coffee you can make. You sit down and you say to yourself, how am I ever going to go in and break the news to a congregation that loves him as much as you have ever loved any of your seminaries? How will you ever go in and break that news? And, of course, how do you then think ahead organizationally and say, it's 2 weeks to Christmas, how are you going to have this incredible funeral at the same time that people are going to be preparing? Only Adele could pull something like that, with or without crutches. There's the question, and I'm here to tell you, it doesn't matter whether you're some professional or whether you've read all the books in the world. I've read huge volumes on grief. The best one put out is this little one for 50 cents called Good Grief by Granger Westerberg. And it is one of the best things that locates the interior world and says something about how we feel and how we reach out to others. There are other books back there that I purchased. I believe I bought a dozen of them. You all can make a mad scramble for them at the end of the session. There's also a bibliography so that you can begin getting a focus on what's that interior world like. How do you walk in and tell a staff and then tell another group of people in your entire congregation? That's a painful place to go. And whether you're a professional having to handle that question, or whether it is a close member of a family, or whether somebody you don't know as well, to share that news is a difficult place to go. Then after Adam, I had said, I know what I'm doing here. Folks, we're not going to have another seminarian for a year. We're going to close this down. We're going to take a break and we're going to grieve. We're not going to shorten the grieving process. Now, what's the phrase? If you want to make God laugh, tell God your plans. Because in through the door came Jennifer Durant, and she was at a newcomers session, much as you hold here. I'm not interested in doing my field ed work here, she said to me. But we like this congregation so much that my family wants to attend elsewhere. Don't worry, I'll go and do my field ed someplace else. Really? Okay, I thought to myself, you got 15 seconds. Tell me your background. And before she was done, I was out hunting down the senior ward. I have somebody you want to meet. What is there about God the Holy Spirit that bestows life, that takes us where we don't want to go, into places where we are going to find life in a whole new key that none of us could have envisioned? And are we willing to go? Really? I don't know about you. I will do anything to keep myself from going into those delicate places. When my mother died as an invalid for 7 years from all kinds of complications, and she was bedridden, it was all I could make myself do to go into hospital rooms where people were suffering from the same ailment. That's the humanity in us, isn't it? And yet, the paradox of life and living is that to be able to go into those places is where we find life. Jennifer Durant was with us for 2 years as a seminarian, and I will tell this very shortly. In her senior year, as she approached graduation, she began to see signs of ALS, and it was confirmed that she had ALS, and then eventually she died as a priest from that. And her question was, how could God possibly call me to give up all that I had as a CEO, to be called to be a priest, to die like this? Why am I not being given the length of years to practice my priesthood? And then she continues to turn it around and teach, who will I be as a minister of the gospel with ALS? Who better to proclaim words of grace? Who better to say the words, do not be afraid, be at peace? We talk about a series that we have here at St. Patrick's, which is about lifelines. Lifelines are people. They're not studies. Lifelines are right in front of me. And if we can possibly learn, all of us together, to take our experience of the wisdom of our years and learn how to offer that, our humanity, then I think we've claimed the ministry that God intends for us. There's a wonderful book out, One Day, Two Unfixables, We Age, Then We Die, Asterisk, We Pass Away. He hasn't inquired or contacted me about this, but I've changed the title of his book, Being Mortal, to Being Human. I think if we talk about, if we factor out that one quality of mortality, we miss the relationship, which is so dynamic, that when we touch on our mortality, it feeds all of our qualities of being human. The other thing is, the other asterisk that needs to be up there is that it's written so much it was written from the standpoint of trying to instruct physicians and caregivers, that sometimes it might be a bit specialized. Great book, certainly recommend it. But the real primary document that lies behind all of this literature was Ernest Becker's Pulitzer Prize winning book. Anybody remember that? Yeah. This is the primary resource. That's what really spawned into the whole idea, not about the length of our years, but the quality of how we live. And moving past that point, the irony of our condition, writes Becker, is that the deepest need is to be free of the anxiety of death and annihilation. Notice he does not say to be free of the anxiety of passing away. He calls it as it is. But it is life itself which awakens it. And so we must shrink from being fully alarmed. I like to invert Gawandé's thesis to say that we really touch on our mortality and we really claim that is when we start to live fully as a human being. Why is it? When I think of the people I've loved and seen their lives continue to grow in me and give me life. What is that? What is that mystery? Have some of you felt that? I heard yes. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So there is no expedient. There is nothing that we won't go to fix the unfixables. Turn off the spigot of emotion, so that when we walk into a situation where there are tears, it makes us uncomfortable. There's something in us, our defense mechanisms, that want to turn that off, the spigot. Or we want to fix the unfixables, where we start saying, well, how do I take my body that is passing away and create more length of years? How do we do that? I love to pick out ticky-tacky birthday cards. Some of you have received them. And I was looking in Hallmark the other day, and it said, eat more organics, work out more, forget the smoking, drop the drinking. You open the card and it says, happy birthday, but you'll still die. Wow. Okay. That's what Becker was talking about in 1974, about rather than meditating on our mortality and enhancing how we view ourselves as human beings and living into the fullest, what we want to do is back off that. Russell Baker wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning book called Growing Up. If you want a book for your summer reading list, Growing Up, Russell Baker. He tells the story about how his father died, and when his father dies, there are neighbors that come in to see him and console him. Don't worry, your father is with the angels in heaven. And Baker records, although I could not have understood it completely, later on I came to see that life was just a cosmic joke. That my happiness was only a prelude to sadness, a loss of those that I had come to fully love and embrace in my life. So from that day on, listen to these words, I never cried with all of my tears, and never laughed with all of my laughter. When we touch on our mortality, I think we start to become and live more fully human. Okay. Oh, okay. Siskel and Ebert. You all remember these? That's these characters. We're going to go to the movies. Blue. Blue.
Blue.
No. No. Just turn the. Okay. Real old movie. This is a re-release called Mass Appeal in 1984. I begin by a disclaimer. The disclaimer is that this relationship between a rector and his seminarian deacon is in no way any reflection on Kurt and his relationship with Michael.
Okay.
The seminarian has given a sermon that has absolutely infuriated the parishioners. They've forgotten that this really is about being a student who is learning. Members of the congregation are there storming the place. And here is Jack Lemmon, who always reaches for the bottle of wine, who's trying to talk to the seminarian, and they get a telephone call. Let's run the DVD. Sound. Can we put the sound up a little?
Way up.
Mark, when I first came here, the people didn't want me. Priests in every place was unloved. Nobody was happy with his transfer. Men ignored me. Women were painfully polite to me. Come home after my daily rounds and throw things.
explain it.
Well, I can. You lost control.
All right, I lost control, and I'm glad I did.
A priest is supposed to inspire control.
This morning, I felt like a priest for the first time.
We agreed on one particular sermon.
I'm telling you, I don't know what happened. It's a mystery to me. Why can't it be a mystery to them?
Oh, Mark. My congregation is not some primitive tribe that'll watch in awe while their priest becomes possessed. Look at this. The collection went down 30%. It is not an accident that the collection comes after the sermon. It's like a Nielsen rating.
Father, I don't want to make things difficult for you here. I mean, talk to Monsignor Burke. I'll ask him to let you off the hook.
What?
Father, Mrs. Hart is on line too.
Well, why is she calling? She didn't even go to Mass.
It's about her mother.
Ginny, what happened? I'll be right over there. You come with me.
I should have seen an attack come.
She was 78.
Her mother looked at me 89.
It was a fast and merciful death. Be thankful for that.
Oh, in that hospital, and those tubes. She looked like a trapped animal.
Oh, she would have been very sick. Thank God it wasn't a long, drawn-out death. Mary Figaro's mother took 2 years. 2 years, Ginny. Now, your mother wouldn't want any part of that.
You know, when they were checking her in at the hospital, they were putting a plastic identification bracelet around her wrist, and she said, "I'm sorry, I can't wear this. I only wear platinum."
You were awfully quiet.
I was listening.
You should have said something.
That's not my way. I don't want to say it was merciful or to look at Mary Figaro's mother.
Well, now you're going to tell me what I did wrong.
I'm not saying you're wrong. You like to say things. I don't.
Why not?
Because everything I think of saying sounds so stupid.
But that's the whole idea. Consolation should sound stupid. That way a person in grief can realize how inconsolable their grief is. Now, inconsolable grief puts a person in a very exalted position. And that's how most people get through tragedies. Now, it's your responsibility as a priest to raise common grief to the level of the inconsolable by saying something inane. Give it a try. Hit me with a tragedy. What? A tragedy. Somebody comes up to you after Mass and says,
My baby died in his crib last night.
that's awful. That was you say? What made you think of a thing like
You
this?
said a tragedy.
Get into it.
What would you say?
Well, if the mother was young, you could get... You see, if the mother was young, you could say, you can have another.
Like an hors d'oeuvre?
What's right there?
I'd rather not say anything. Can I just listen?
No. All right, I'll give you one. My father beats me.
No, I'm supposed to say something inane.
Right.
Let me think. Father beats you. Well, you don't have any scars. You'd never know it.
I go to school with black eyes.
Catholic school?
What difference does that make?
We're always fighting in Catholic school, so they'll have black eyes. You must fit right in.
My father left us. We don't know if he's dead or alive.
That's okay. Who needs a sadist like that for a father anyway?
My mother remarried. I hate her new husband.
Why?
Because the church says she can't remarry until it's certain her first husband is dead.
Well, that's no reason to hate him.
I cry myself to sleep because I am sure she's going to hell.
You believe there's such a thing as hell?
After a while, I wouldn't speak to her.
Speak to her now, don't you?
She died. We hadn't exchanged a word in 2 years.
Go on, I'm listening.
preparatory seminary when I was 13, and I believed everything I was taught, followed all the rules to the letter, and I wanted everyone to be perfect, especially my mother. And when I thought she wasn't, I just cut her off. She'd write and call, and I wouldn't answer. Once I came so close, I had the phone in my hand, and hung up. 3 weeks later, she was dead. You asked me if I think there's such a thing as hell. There are hints of it right here on Earth.
What did that feel like as you were watching it? It was funny at the beginning, and the point was made. But what happened in this group as you all were watching it? Something, the demeanor in here changed. The laughter stopped. Why did things change? I know how reticent you are as a group to speak. What was there in that exchange that made that pivot, that made that change?
So I think we transferred from the comedy part. Certainly I thought that was really funny myself. And even with my tears coming down, I thought that was so funny. But then we started to get sort of drawn into a more empathetic, emotional feeling towards Jack Lemmon. And it got deeper and deeper and deeper.
How did that happen? Yes.
I saw a change in Jack.
Yes. They went from play acting into a real live human encounter where the young seminarian was listening. He moved his body physically over close to him. He established that connection so that there was support that was given for Jack Lemmon to share his story. Yes, there is a place experientially called hell in this life. And somebody said, yes, amen to that. Wow. Could that be the ministry that we offer rather than fixing and turning off the emotional or raising the inconsolable to the ridiculous heights? Could that ministry possibly be just in going, being ourselves and listening? Is that what people really want? And when other people get tired of hearing the stories about the bereaved, do we realize that there is a very profound need to continue to share stories about the ones that we have loved but see no more, rather than moving on? Because the person who is grieving is realigning her or his relationship to that person, and by sharing these stories can do that. And in our ministry, Sheep and the Shepherds, is to enable people to be there, to sit down next to them and allow them to continue to tell the same stories, even though we've heard it over and over again. The point is, the person sharing needs to hear it again and again because they are realigning their relationship, if you will, at the same time that he takes that spot on the bench next to Jack Lemmon. The person that Jack Lemmon has lost, by virtue of the telling of that story, is coming and being present to them. That's what we really and truly want. Durant's book that she wrote before she died by blinking her eyes at a computer. She recorded something she had shared with me about what it was like to be with those physicians when she learned at UVA that she had ALS. And so what's the prognosis, I blurted out. What's next? Without pity, without expression, without glancing at my file and realizing that I was a wife and a mother, without looking me in the eyes or holding my hands, without humanizing me, without recognizing my soul, without acknowledging that I even had a Bible there on my lap, without any of that, this guy only said 3 and 5 years. You have between 3 and 5 years. There was discussion of my immediately starting a medication to try to show the disease's progression, but beyond that, all there was to do was to fall apart. And fall apart I did. Deep breaths and sobs. None of them knew what quite to do with me until one of them said, "Let's call the chaplain." Wow. Now the story behind Jennifer is that she went on, she was ordained as a priest, she served at Church of Our Savior there in Charlottesville, and working with her people, she helped them to learn what it means to be there in support of somebody who's dying, and they with their perception of life and living, they became a sheep that she could join and be a part of that humanity. Her story is a remarkable one, and to this day, just as you saw Jack Lemmon rearranging his relationship to the person who had died, I continue to rearrange my relationship to Jennifer, who continues to preach through me. She was a priest indeed, and even ALS, as a scourge as it was, became strangely transformed into a gift to give us all life. Bishop John Coburn of Massachusetts, maybe some of you remember him. He said, God just has this bit about taking us where we don't want to go. And the place where life presses on you is often the place where you will find God. Smile back here. Does that resonate?
You have to need him.
Yeah,
To
right.
find him, you gotta need him.
Right. And that means, okay, let me go with that. That means acknowledging your dependence so that you learn through this relationship what it means to trust and how to be shepherded. The gift of ashes. I served in a very large cathedral in Shreveport. There were many on our staff. We would all go out and give ashes, and there was one particular associate who always seemed to enjoy the very dark humor of saying, what we need to be doing is putting ashes on people's foreheads by saying, life's a bitch and then you die. Scott Ray. I always thought about that. There was a part of me that wanted to laugh but didn't laugh because it was too true. And even in my later years of serving at the altar, and then last Ash Wednesday, I administered ashes by saying, remember that you are dust, and to dust that you shall return. And then I added, and you can do this when you're retired, and then I added, remember that you are marked as Christ's son forever. That somehow is what you find when you're willing to claim your mortality and that you are a part of the creation. You find the Creator. Life is a bitch, and then you die. But remember that you are marked as Christ's son forever. Wow. Wow. Henry Now some of you may know him. There are a Roman Catholic priest who's written volumes and volumes. I love this quotation on compassion. Compassion means to co-suffer with somebody. It asks us to go where it hurts, to enter into the places of pain, to share in brokenness, fear, confusion, and anguish. It challenges us to cry out with those in misery, not shout for the chaplain. To mourn with those who are lonely, to weep with those in tears. Compassion requires us to be weak with the weak, vulnerable with the vulnerable, and powerless with the powerless. It means full immersion in the condition of being human. See, this is again why I want to retitle that book, without Gwande's permission, that to claim your mortality is to begin to live into the fullness of being a human being, to cry with all of our tears and laugh with all of our laughter. That's Jennifer. I needed to be treated like a human being, is what she said over and over again. Okay. And then we get to Paul Brand. Paul Brand is someone you may not have heard about. He's written a series of books, Fearfully and Wonderfully Made, In God's Image. His last book is called, listen to this one, The Gift of Pain. The Gift of Pain. Paul Brand worked in Louisiana and in different leper colonies, a physician. And at the end of this book, I found this phrase tucked away. I think it's something we can do. When suffering strikes, those of us standing close by are flattened by the shock and the aftershocks. We fight back the lumps in our throats, march resolutely to hospitals for visits, mumble a few cheerful words, and then turn on our heels and run for fear of our own emotions. But when I ask patients and their families, who really helped you in their suffering? I hear a strange, imprecise answer. The person described rarely has smooth answers and a winsome, effervescent personality. It is someone quiet, understanding, who listens more than talks, who does not judge or even offer much advice. A sense of presence. Someone there when I needed him. A hand to hold, an understanding. The bewildered hug. A shared lump in the throat. We want what I'm not willing to give. Clear, precise psychological formulas. Techniques that I study in my surgical manuals. But the human psyche is too complex for a manual. The best we can offer is to see, to touch, and to be there. That's the phrase I want to hang out there, to be there. I'm sorry, Mike, you get up now. For the duration of my ministry, 38 years, I've written and spoken across the country on these two aspects. What it means to be there, which is an active, dependable presence. You're going to show up. You're not going to turn on your heels and run. And then to be an active listener. If that evokes Carl Rogers in your ears, fine. What does it mean to sit on that table and let Jack Lemmon share his story? What does that take? Because what we've got going on there, just as when we move through the ashes of our mortality to the Creator, our belief as Christians is that when we are being there, Christ fulfills his promise to be with us until the end of the ages. God was being there in Jesus Christ and continues to call us as baptized people to be there. If I stopped the discussion and I got out my newsprint, do you remember when we used to do these things with newsprint? I do, because I go into a cold turkey. Who really helped you? What were the characteristics? What would be some of the things that you would give me to write on the newsprint? And I think they would fall in these two categories. Somebody who's there and somebody who is a listener. The gift of being there, there's lots of theology behind all of this. I know that when I lay in a hospital bed and they thought that I had lymphoma in the 1980s, the last thing I wanted was to sit there and recite the Nicene Creed. And getting through that was a difficult period of time. It's my wife who needs to be called a saint. I'd like to really focus on the fact that when we're truly being present to another person, we are respecting their dignity. That is a whole new way of understanding the baptismal covenant, to respect the dignity of allowing them to be mortal and therefore fully human. Okay, steel magnolias. If we had time, it's about 25 minutes till. About what time do you want to wrap up?
Quarter till? 2 o'clock, somebody said?
Quarter up? Okay, quarter up. So if I show you, and we went through, that's Cisco and Ebert over there, if we went through Steel Magnolias, the first thing I would tell you about this film is that when Melissa and I were in Shreveport at St. Mark's Cathedral, everybody, so many of our friends ran down to Natchitoches, Louisiana, because that's where they were filming it, and they all wanted to be seconds in the film. They all wanted to be a part of the crowd. They all wanted to be in this movie. Melissa and I looked at each other, are you kidding? Really? And I mean, people of all stations, they took off from professional jobs, they left classes, they all ran down to Natchitoches. And to our complete surprise, almost all of them ended up in the movie. So that when we went to see the movie in the movie theater, we sat there and we said, look, there's little Courtney Hood jumping off the porch at the beginning of the movie to get the newspaper. There's Jody Holloman out there on the dance floor. The big poofy lady that they poofed up to sing for the wedding that was Pepto-Bismol pink was Gail Odom, head of the music department at Centenary College. I mean, and all my physicians' hands are the ones that disconnect the plugs on Julia Roberts. Melissa's OBGY, whatever. Dr. Pineda is the one that walks out and says it went good, really good. And after watching all of that, I began to say to myself, what if we began to live life not as if we were in a movie, but we had some other script? And we've been given a script about being human beings. How would we do that? Do you remember the scene when they're all out at the cemetery and Daryl Hannah is, she's going to be an angel in heaven, and Sally Field says, that's a really nice thought, and my heart can feel that, and my head can understand that, but my heart can't get around it. And they each have platitudes to share. And finally, it's Dolly Parton that says, Drum says you never left her. And that's when Sally Field stops with that open-ended affirmation where Dolly Parton, as being a true friend, can say, couldn't leave my shabby. And then who is it that breaks in and says, here, if you're so angry, hit this. It grabs Weezer and says, now's your chance to do something for humanity. Strike Weezer. And they all break down in laughter. And she says, we were getting entirely too serious. Oh, really? So in that scene, you have both the tendency to shut off the emotion, but you also have the scene of where somebody brings their human relationship to bear and is just being there. Drum says you never left her. Okay, part of this talk today was part of a 3-part series that we condensed into one because we saw the gift of these other things that came to bear. And so one of the sessions was going to be prescriptive. What then do we do? How do we bring ourselves to bigger? Now, this is my prescription, and I'm being very task-oriented here. Sometimes that can connect up here. What to say and what to do. It has to do with remembering people. And by remembering, I mean, if I had my laser pointer, I would say, the RE is capitalized because we are placing them back into the body of Christ. When we can truly be present with people, when we listen, when we don't run away, we are a presence to them, that begins to place them back into the body of Christ. Nobody goes out to minister to other human beings as a single person. We all go out as the body of Christ. Can we claim that gift? Okay, so by all means, please begin with your thoughts and prayers. That has gotten more bad press in this day and age. Begin. That's exactly where you begin with your prayers and your thoughts, where you're really focusing about that person. If you need to, put an empty chair in front of you and begin to envision what life must be like for that person right now, and offer it in prayer. And then go be that prayer. Be that response to somebody else simply by showing up. Henry Nouwen says, the compassionate heart beats with prayer. It's not that we change the situation. Prayer changes us, as C.S. Lewis. And we make contact. Please send cards. When both of my parents died and my mailbox filled up, how meaningful that was. How great it is that you in this parish take time to sign cards and send them in. Buy a box of cards so that when loss strikes, you have something, a personal note card, or something where you can remind that person that you're caring about them. No platitudes about becoming God's angels, just I'm here for you. Conveys your presence. Think about it. When you have lost loved ones, what has been meaningful for you? Now, what do you think? I think the answers come very quickly, and they all have to do with somebody reaching out to you and being there for you. And then, this is important. Let your relationship be your guide for a follow-up visit. If you're very close to somebody, then by all means you can call and say in a couple of weeks, let's get together. And just allow that person to talk. Sit on the bench as that young seminarian did with Jack Lemmon. If you don't know that person as well, you might want to give it some more time if you want to make contact. But by all means, convey that you are there to support that person. And I like this one, remain in contact. Keep in mind that people, months and months after their loved ones have passed from them, want to tell stories. I see noddings of heads. That by telling these stories, they are not only continuing to hold on to them, but they are realigning their relationship to them, learning to live with them. Charlie Price, who taught theology over at the seminary, the golden age of theologians at VTS. Got to get that one in. Charlie, we used to nickname him as Shake and Quake. Somebody asked him in class, I remember somebody said, well, Charlie, where do the dead go? And he got really quiet. And he said, when I think of my mother, I know that she is with Christ. And that's enough. I know that she is with Christ. I don't have to define a spatial relation. And then he said, kind of a strange saying, where aren't the dead? I've never lost my mother. My mother is still dealing with me. I I'm still working in my relationship. And if that's true, then I think that by continuing to tell stories, reminding people of things and how people were meaningful to you is an important part. The other thing is, and this is very prescriptive, if you have a daytime or something, remember the anniversary of somebody's loss. I guarantee you that for the person who loses them, they will start a countdown, particularly in the first week, walking up to the days before that person passes, and living through it again. One of the things, because I couldn't possibly keep all these things in my head that I've done in congregations where I've served, is to keep a book of anniversaries and things that have occurred, losses, marriages, and then a simple note or a mention on Sunday morning. You keep it all up here, and so in a very concrete way, you remember that loss in the context of your relationship. That is another way to be there, isn't it? Okay, I don't know what else you would add. I think we've all done a whole lot of living in this room, and there are other ways that you can think of, but they all come down to how you bring yourself to bear. No easy surgical formula. How do you be there for somebody, and realizing that God is keeping that promise, I am with you unto the end of the ages, with this person who's just walked up out of nowhere and said, remind me about it. So-and-so, tell me about it. You know what I really remember? Okay, let's see if I have another slide. Oh, okay. When sheep become shepherds, I think it's very important for all of us to recognize that living into our baptismal covenant is taking on this ministry. I loved what Michael said this morning, amongst many things that he said when he talked about the fact that there are times when shepherds have to let go of their tasks and allow themselves to be sheep. Because if we've learned anything about those who are grieving and those who are dying, we have to allow them to lead us. We have to learn to go with them. And that's sometimes difficult if we're trying to fix something or close off the emotions. One of the things that always resonates with me, and I tell this a bittersweet memory, was that when my mother was so much an invalid before she died, the clergy always came to see her. She had been very active in her church on the search committee, on vestry, head of the altar guild. The only thing she didn't do, she was never treasurer. And so she didn't quite reach sainthood. But what did happen was the people stopped coming. The people stopped coming. Mr. Reynolds was there. Peter Coffin, the associate, was always there. But the people stopped coming. And I heard them of the strength. It was really heartfelt when she said, when I became useless, I became useless to them. And you know, she was wrong. That was her experience, but she was wrong. It was that they didn't know how to deal with that kind of dying process, or how to be there. And I committed myself at that time to begin to learn those skills and to talk about that and to encourage people to go from being sheep to shepherds. And I learned first and foremost that clergy can visit, but it's when the laity of the congregation really makes the connection that people believe the church is there. And why is that? Because clergy are paid to be there. And when you ask, who really helped you? When I stumbled on this research, it stopped me in my shoes. It's not professionals that are graded highest for helping other individuals. It's their peers. When there's a peer relationship, people often say, that's where the real source of help came, because I could identify and relate to them more than somebody who is professionally trained to do that. Now, how you would want to do that as a parish, and how you would develop and inspire that, I know that you do that in so many ways already. How will you continue to invite others into that mission? Sometimes the question marks are always the best place to end, especially when it's now 10 minutes till, and I owe you 5 minutes. Next time I do this will be 5 minutes. Thank you so much. I hope this was helpful for you all. I'm here for some questions. There's a dozen of those books. They are excellent. Any of you who work in this area need to see this book, Tear Soup. Jennifer, do you know this one?
I'm actually not familiar.
Yes, this is outstanding for painting the picture of the bereaved. So, thanks a lot, and I appreciate you all being here today.